Hey everybody, it's Lon.TV, and we're taking a look today at the Steam Deck. I ordered this about a year ago, and it finally showed up late last week, and I've been playing around with it for the better part of a week, and I like it a lot. And what I wanted to do in this video is do the review and the overview, but also talk about the fact that you can't get these for a while, and there might be some good, suitable alternatives for portable gaming, even things you might not think about, like the Surface Laptop Go, that perform very close to the Steam Deck on most games. So what we're going to do in this video is step through the Steam Deck and talk about everything that it is, and there's a lot to like here. And later on in the video, we'll look at running some of the same games that we're going to demonstrate on the Steam Deck on the Surface Go laptop and see how things compare. Now we're going to take a deep dive into this. We're going to look at a lot of different features. I am shooting this video in early July of 2022, so this is a pretty up-to-date Steam Deck versus a lot of the early review videos that you might have seen. I've been very pleased with how polished both the hardware and software feel, and we'll dig through all of this in just a second. But I do want to let you know, in the interest of full disclosure, that I paid for this with my own funds. All the opinions you're about to hear are my own. No one is paying for this review, nor has anyone reviewed or approved what you're about to see before it was uploaded. So let's get into it now and see what this Steam Deck is all about. Now the price point on this I think is pretty reasonable for a handheld PC with the kind of performance you'll see out of it. It starts at $399, but the entry-level version only has 64 gigabytes of slow eMMC storage on board. So you probably want to look at the two models that have faster NVMe storage. There's a mid-range version for $529 that has 256 gigabytes of NVMe storage. This one we're looking at today has 512 gigabytes. It sells for $649. And one of the advantages of the top-end model, in addition to the extra storage, is that it has an etched glass display which doesn't reflect as much light. It looks really, really nice. And you'll see just how nice the games look on it in a little bit. So if you can afford it, I think going for the top-end model makes a lot of sense. And compared to some of the other niche handheld PCs that I have looked at, even at $649, I think this is a really good deal, especially given the performance that we will see out of it as we work our way through the review. Now, all of these models have the same specs inside. So they have an AMD Zen 2 APU built in. That's got a quad-core architecture. It runs between 2.4 and 3.5 gigahertz. It also has 8 RDNA 2 GPU cores. It consumes anywhere from 4 to 15 watts of power depending on the game that you're running. And this is, I think at the moment, a little faster than most of the AMD-based laptops we've looked at over the last year or two. Even some of the higher-end ones, this one seems to perform better than those do. Now, the display is a 7-inch 1280 by 800 display. Now, that's not a very high-resolution display. In fact, it's just slightly above 720p. And the reason for that is twofold. One, it's not that large, so you get a good amount of pixel density even at that lower resolution. But also, as powerful as the APU is inside of this device, it's not going to rival what you would get out of a gaming laptop or desktop that has a discrete GPU. So by rendering a lower resolution, you can get really good frame rates out of some AAA games, as you'll see in a little bit. And those games are going to look great on this small display because of the pixel density. But if you were playing games at this resolution on a larger display, it would not look very good at all. And that's kind of the trick, I think, of this device. And it's just limited by where portable technology is at the moment. The display is nice and bright at around 400 nits, and it runs at 60 hertz. Now, it's got 16 gigabytes of RAM on board. It's DDR5 RAM, nice and fast for gaming, and you get that RAM across the entire product line. So even the low-end model has 16 gigabytes built in. That's a lot more than what we see on laptops priced at or above what you'll pay for one of these Steam Decks. It's got Wi-Fi built in, of course, but it's only AC Wi-Fi. But I found when I was downloading my games over Wi-Fi, we were getting about half a gigabit of transfer speed over my multi-gigabit network, which is not bad, but you would get a little more speed out of a Wi-Fi 6 radio. But you can plug in Ethernet devices to this to speed up the network. Battery life, though, is not going to be spectacular while you're playing games on this, and it's going to depend on the game that you're playing and how much power it consumes. So a AAA title like Red Dead Redemption 2 is probably going to get you about 2 hours, but older games like Half-Life 2 or something might get you closer to the 5 or 6 hour mark. So it's really going to vary based on how much stress you put the system under. And speaking of stressing the system, there is a fan on board, and you will hear the fan when you're gaming, especially if the game you're playing is stressing the system and you're in a relatively quiet scene. That said, it's not one of those high-pitched whiny fans that I've seen on some other PC handhelds in the past, but if you are someone who doesn't like fan noise, it's going to be a lot louder than a Nintendo Switch might be, even when that system is placed under load. The air intake is on the back of the system here, and it will exhaust out the top, and that air gets pretty hot running out the top of the device here. So it's definitely got a lot of cooling to do, especially when the system is under heavy load. The control layout feels really nice. When I was looking at the initial pictures of this, I thought the D-pad would be very uncomfortable being this far to the left, but it actually does okay for me. I'm not feeling too fatigued playing games with the D-pad, and what's nice about the D-pad is that it's a really good D-pad, so retro games do play pretty nice on this one, and there are some great videos on YouTube about how to get the best emulation performance out of this device. The thumbsticks are nice on it as well. I got a good amount of travel. They're quite sensitive, and they do respond very nicely. Like all Valve devices, you've got these capacitive touchpads that do different things depending on the game or function that you're using. I haven't done too much with these yet, but they do deliver haptic feedback. If you ever played with any of Valve's VR hardware, you will be very familiar with these kinds of pads, and this also appeared in a form on their Steam controller a little while back. The buttons feel very nice as well. Again, even though they're all the way over to the right, it's very comfortable to get to those buttons, so I didn't really feel too much fatigue playing anything with it. You got two very nice stereo speakers in the front, along with microphones above the screen. There's no camera on this, though, so you're not going to be doing any Zoom calls on this unless you attach a USB webcam. And speaking of USB, there is a full-function USB Type-C port here at the top. This is a Gen 2 port, but it's not USB 4. And I was able to hook up a USB Type-C docking station to this, and I was able to get video out. I was able to access external storage off of that and get Ethernet plus power going over a single cable. But I would have liked to have seen two USB-C ports for a little more flexibility. And a little later in the video, we're going to boot Windows off of an external SSD using this port as well. You got your power button over here, a headphone jack here, your volume rockers, you got your shoulder buttons here along with some analog triggers. On the back you have trigger buttons underneath the grip there. I sometimes hit those by accident, so you might want to be careful about how you map those controls when you're playing. On the bottom, we just have an SD card slot, and that SD card slot will help augment its onboard storage. And I would recommend putting some older games on the SD card and putting the newer games on the internal NVMe drive. Now, when you're looking for SD cards, my advice would be to look for one that has the A2 rating on it. And that rating refers to how well those cards perform with applications. And in this case, the application is gaming. And when you have an A2 card, it can handle random reads and writes a little better than cards that are not rated for that. And games really do a lot of that random reading and writing. And that's why you want to look for one of those cards, especially when you're playing PC games, because many PC games are designed to run on SSDs on a regular laptop or desktop computer. Now, this only has a UHS 1 card reader on board, so you don't need a UHS 2 card. And UHS 1 can do about 100 megabytes per second on a card that is running at its optimal performance. So these are very close to what you would typically get out of a spinning USB hard drive, but you have better random reads and writes on those A2 cards versus what you would get out of a mechanical hard drive. But again, I think the newer AAA titles should go on the built-in NVMe storage. And you can manage what's on the device in the storage section here. You can move games from one to the other, and it's pretty easy to manage. Now, the weight on this is about 669 grams. That is 1.4 pounds, so a little heavier maybe than an iPad, but it's very well balanced. All the weight is kind of in the middle here, so both of your hands support that weight, and it's not too fatiguing holding it for a longer period of time, but everyone's experience will vary on that, of course. The build quality is all plastic, but it feels nice and polished. It does feel like a very mature piece of hardware. Valve has been making hardware over the last couple of years, and it feels like a lot of what they've learned from their prior products is making its way in here. I was most impressed with just how nicely the software works along with the hardware. They've developed a really nice and intuitive interface for what you would be using this device for. So you can navigate with the touch display, you can use the controllers here. Everything is centered on the gaming experience because this is a gaming device first and foremost. You can get at your Steam store to buy more stuff. Right now the summer sale is going on, so I'm going to stay out of there before I get into too much stuff here. And all in, I think if you're just looking to play games on this, there's no barrier to entry. Your games are front and center. You will get your Steam library presented to you right when you first turn it on. And what's nice also is that you're able to see which games work on the Steam Deck and which ones might be questionable. So they have a section here called Great on Deck, and all of these games that I have previously purchased are the ones that they know will run nicely on the Steam Deck. And then if I go into a game that is not certified, let me go to one of my installed ones here, you will see that on the game before you run it. So for example, Red Dead Redemption 2 is going to run, but they have some warnings here that although it's playable, there are some things that might not be so great. So for example, the launcher tool might require a keyboard to log in and maybe require me to pull up the on-screen keyboard to do it. And they also said that some of the text, because of the small display here, might be hard to read, but otherwise the game will run. Now this is not running Windows, although you can run Windows on it, which we'll do later in the review. This is actually running a version of Linux that Steam has developed for this device called SteamOS. Now SteamOS has been around for a number of years. It first emerged on a series of PCs that Valve was selling through third-party manufacturers called Steam machines. And back then, the big problem was that if the game wasn't ported to Linux, it wasn't playable. That has changed because Valve has been spending a lot of time with their ProtonDB open source architecture to get Windows games to run on Linux at decent frame rates. So you'll find that a bulk of your library now, even if it's just on Windows, is available to you on the Steam Deck with perhaps a few compatibility issues here or there. But I found that most of the Windows games that I've tried run really nicely on here, and we'll boot up a couple as we work our way through the review here. So that was one of the big gotchas with the older versions of SteamOS. They've really made a lot of progress here, and I wouldn't be surprised if we start seeing SteamOS desktops re-emerge, because if you are building a PC, you could skip the Windows license and just install the SteamOS on it if you prefer to go that route. All right, let's take a look at some gameplay now on the Steam Deck. This is a verified Steam Deck game called No Man's Sky. And as you can see, as we're running around on the planet here, we're getting about 60 frames per second. We're running the GPU at about 80 to 90% and the CPU at about half that rate. And we'll jump into the spaceship here and take off. By the way, the battery report here says we're consuming about 25 watts. So this is going to be one of those games that gets you closer to the 2-hour mark than the 6-hour mark, perhaps. But as you can see, it's really nicely playable, and the game looks nice and sharp on here too, but that's because we're only running at the base resolution of the display here at 1280 by 800, and that's why it looks so good. If we were playing this on a larger display, again, you would start to see some of the lack of detail. But overall, a really nice experience here with this game that is designed to work with the Steam Deck. All right, here's another game. This is Ace Combat 7, also a Steam Deck certified game here. And as you can see, it is running at a good 60 frames per second now and looks really nice on the display as well. As you can see, I really like flying games and space games, so a lot of the things that I like to play are running great on here. And this is the kind of experience I think you'll get with most of the on-deck certified games. What it also does is it will automatically adjust the settings for the deck. So you don't have to go in and start messing around with the settings, although you can if you want. So every time you boot the game up, any of the certified games will get adjusted to the best settings automatically for the Steam Deck hardware. Now, as I mentioned, you can also install games on an SD card. So I've got another certified game here, Doom Eternal. And Microsoft is actually the publisher of this one, but they made an effort to get this working properly on the Steam Deck. And when I go and run it here off the SD card, this is an A2 card, a SanDisk Extreme, you can see that it doesn't take all that long to get the game loaded up. So we'll let it run through the loading process here in real time so you can get a feel for what it's like to boot off of one of those SD cards. Again, though, I do really recommend those A2 cards because that's what these games will likely expect from you. But here we are. We're at the title screen, and we can go ahead and jump into a quick match here. So let me get through the entry screens here, and we will then jump into a game so you can see how it plays when you're running off of an SD card. All right, so we got Doom Eternal running now. One thing to note is that the built-in settings here really reduce the resolution quite a bit. It's hard to see on screen, but if we pull up the menus, for example, it's really hard to read all of the menu settings because these were designed to run on a much higher resolution display. But as you can see here, the game is running pretty nice. I'm not getting any lag or slowdown for loading off the SD cards, so the experience here is pretty good. Again, some of the super ultra AAA titles might need some faster storage, but this SanDisk card seems to be doing just fine here running Doom Eternal off of that A2 SD technology here. So now let's take a look at a game that is not certified on deck, and that is Red Dead Redemption 2. Now again, they said the game would run, which it does, but there were, they say, a few interface issues that might crop up. Although I had no problem getting this game up and running, and it did set all the settings for me automatically, and we're getting about 40 to 50, sometimes 60 frames per second, depending on what's getting rendered on screen here. So right now I'm in a village where you've got more structures to render, so that is challenging the GPU a bit more, but this is certainly playable. And remember, we're running this at its native resolution of 1280 by 800, which is feasible to run a game like this at this resolution with this kind of chip on board. But if you hook this up to a TV, it would certainly not look as nice as it does here. But if you wanted to take this game on the road with a handheld, this is definitely going to get you there. Now you notice we've had this little statistics panel up throughout the whole time we've been experimenting here. You get to that by hitting this button here and going over to the battery section, and you can add different levels of detail here just by dragging this up and down. And you also get a battery life indicator as well, so it'll give you an idea as to how much battery life you can expect based on the game that you're currently playing. Now this one is eating up about 90% of the GPU right now and 70 or so percent of the CPU. So this game is certainly eating into the battery a lot more than maybe an older game might. But not bad here, and it certainly looks and plays quite nice on this handheld. Now Valve has been pretty open about what people can do with their Steam Decks. We're going to load Windows on it in a minute, but inside of the SteamOS you can actually get access to the GOG and the Epic Games Store libraries with a neat little app called the Heroic Games Launcher. And I'll show you how you can install that here in a second. What we're going to do here is load it up, and what this is going to do is connect me to those other game libraries, but I'm not leaving SteamOS here to do it. So for example, I've got the Ghostbusters Remastered here, which was a free game on the Epic Games Store. And if I hit play now, because I've already downloaded it onto my storage, it's going to load this game up, and I can play it even though it is not a Steam game, and even though I am not currently in Windows. So let this load up, and we'll come back and we'll see how this non-Steam game performs. All right, so here we are inside of Ghostbusters Remastered, and again, this is the Epic Games Store version, and it's actually running really nicely here, as you can see. We're getting about 60 frames per second, and this is an older game. It's not all that challenging for this hardware to render. This game runs fine on the Switch as well. But this is the Windows game, and we're not running this directly through the Steam interface. We launched it through that Heroic Games Launcher, but the technology that the SteamOS uses to get Windows games to run is being employed here, and you can see just how well it is working. So if you have libraries on GOG or on the Epic Games Store, it's not a heavy lift to get this running. You just have to jump into desktop mode and click a couple of things and you're there. And let me show you desktop mode now, because this does have a regular desktop and software that you can install on it. Now, I did connect my Bluetooth keyboard here, which has a tracking nub to make this a little bit easier. But when you're in your SteamOS interface here, you just hit the Steam button. And if you go over to Power, you can select Switch to Desktop. And what this will do is melt away the gaming interface and bring you to what really looks like a traditional computer desktop here. You've got your Start menu equivalent. It's all got that Steam look and feel to it. You can see the games that I have installed on here that I can load up in this way. And they have a store that has applications that you can download for it. And that's where I found the Heroic game launcher. I just typed in Heroic here. I clicked on Install, and that got it over. And then to get the Heroic Games Launcher accessible on the gaming side, you just go into your Steam desktop interface here, which looks just like the one you have on your computer normally. And you click on Add a Game here, and then add a non-Steam game, and you'll see the Heroic Launcher on the list. You add it, and then it's available to you on the gaming side. You do need to, of course, log into your accounts on GOG and on the Epic Games Store through the Heroic Launcher, but after that you can install your games onto the Steam Deck using that Heroic software to do it, and it's been working great on my Steam Deck. And this is a flat pack store, so most of the software that you'll find on other platforms is going to be found here. So for example, I've got the Brave browser running on my Steam Deck. From that, I can go to my YouTube channel here and load that up, and all seems to be functioning pretty well. So you can turn this into a regular computer, and what's nice is that you can get at that desktop interface fairly easily on here and get a lot more functionality without having to boot up another operating system. But if you want to install another operating system, you can, and I've got Windows 10 loaded up here, but I'm able to get it to run completely from an external USB drive, in this case a little Seagate SSD that they sent to us free of charge to review a little while back, in full disclosure. Now I've got this running through the USB Type-C port, but earlier I was able to get it to work with a docking station so I could charge this at the same time. And like before, we have my Bluetooth keyboard attached here. And my interest in running Windows was getting access to my Game Pass account. And I have a Game Pass Ultimate subscription that gives me access to not only Xbox games and cloud streaming, but PC games too. And a little earlier, I installed Ori here. And we'll see if this game can run. I had to remove some devices from my account because they only allow you to have 10 connected to your computer at any given time. But as you can see here, everything got validated, the app worked, and we've got the game loading up right now, again, off of the external SSD that's driving everything. One thing to note, though, is that by default, the controller doesn't work, because the controller is not X input compatible out of the gate, and there's another piece of software that you have to run in order to get the controller functioning properly, or of course you can pair up a Microsoft certified controller to it to get everything operational, or at least one that supports X input. And there is a video from another YouTuber called The Fox, which I'll link to in the video description, that shows you how to install that intermediary software to get the controller working. But if you are a Game Pass subscriber and you can get Windows on your machine, you can get access to your Game Pass library. Now, one of the challenges with a Steam Deck right now is actually getting one. When you order it, it takes months to get it. I had to wait a year almost to get mine. But one thing you can get right now is a laptop powered by an Intel 11th or 12th generation processor, or an AMD Ryzen-based device with a 4000, 5000, or 6000 series processor. As you can see here, No Man's Sky is very playable here. We're not getting the 60 frames per second we got on the Steam Deck, but here, running with the same resolution and settings, I'm getting about 35 to 45 frames per second, depending on what's going on in the game. So certainly not as smooth, but it is very playable. Even Red Dead Redemption 2 can run at around 30 frames per second on here, which I think is more than adequate if you're looking for a laptop that has gaming as its secondary function. And that's just something to think about, because oftentimes when people look at these little laptops, they never thought of them as good gaming devices. But Intel and AMD both have made tremendous strides over the last 2 or 3 years, delivering chips with onboard GPUs that allow for reasonable gaming. And that's something that I've been experiencing on this Surface Laptop Go over the last couple of weeks that I have owned it. Let's take a look now, though, at some benchmarks and see how the Steam Deck compares to some other machines we've looked at. So let's start with the 3D Mark TimeSpy Benchmark, and there we got a score of 1,741, and you can see that Surface Laptop Go 2 that we were just demoing is a little below that performance level versus the Steam Deck, but still competitive. And you can also see how some other recent Intel and Ryzen-based devices compare. And the i7-1260p that we saw on a recent Lenovo laptop here does a little better than the Steam Deck does. Let's also take a look at the 3D Mark Wildlife test, and there the Surface Laptop Go 2 came very close to the performance that we got out of the Steam Deck on both versions of the Wildlife test. But remember, these tests test certain things, and on the things that Wildlife tests, they're very comparable, but as you saw, TimeSpy was a little bit different. But look at the iPad Air, the 2022 version. That one has the Apple M1 processor on there, and that chip smokes both the laptops and the Steam Deck. So if Apple was able to get a games library that we see on the PCs built around it, we would see a pretty robust gaming experience on the iPad Airs and the MacBook Airs. But unfortunately right now, Apple just doesn't have the game library that the PC side of things has. And then, of course, you can see where one of the 4800U processors comes in on the Ryzen side there, just below the Steam Deck's performance. So overall, I am very pleased with the Steam Deck. I think it is a very well thought out product. I think it does exactly what it sets out to do, and it plays games quite well, which is its primary purpose. And if you were looking for something that could play PC games in your hand, this is the device that will get you there if you can find one. At the same time, though, I think a laptop is probably more convenient. And as we start seeing some of these newer Ryzen processors come out and the more powerful Intel chips make their way out into some of these thin and light laptops, it's going to be a tougher choice, I think, between a device designed solely for games versus one that can do other things in addition to games and would require you to only bring one device along with you versus two. But if you are someone who likes to play games while lounging on the couch or something like that, this is definitely a consideration. And for those looking for a handheld PC game experience, you're not going to find anything better than this at the moment. And I think it's a very polished and mature feeling product, even though it is relatively new. So kudos to Valve for getting the hardware and the operating system and all the pieces to work so well together. But again, definitely think hard if you've only got enough money for one device about whether or not a thin and light laptop might be a better way to go. That's going to do it for now. Until next time, this is Lon.TV. Thanks for watching.
This channel is brought to you by the Lon.TV supporters, including gold level supporters Chris Allegretta, Brian Parker, Hot Sauce and Video Games, Baby Metal Fox God, Tom Albrecht, Amda Brown, Matt Zagaya, and Tech Time with Eric. If you want to help the channel, you can by contributing as little as $1 a month. Head over to lon.tv/support to learn more. And don't forget to subscribe. Visit lon.tv/s.